When the men cast this guy out, Jesus said, I gotta find him. I'm going after him. And when he did, he invited him into the family. He said, do you know the Son of Man? Do you know the Son of God? He invites him into the family of God by trusting in Jesus. And this same Jesus is pursuing you. And he asks you the same question, do you believe? He says, hey, I know they hurt you, but let me tell you what it's all about. I know that, you were raised a way that maybe brought some pain to you, but I'm pursuing you. I know that your experience with religious people hurt you, but I'm pursuing you. I know that the world has made you feel upside down, but I'm pursuing you, and I've got one question for you. Do you believe in the Son of God? Well, I don't know if it's like this for you, but in my house, there are two words that are often used interchangeably that shouldn't be. And those two words are can't and won't. Dad, I can't go to bed yet. I need to stay up and finish this movie, right? Dad, I can't be any quieter than this. This is my inside voice. Or Dad, this is my favorite. Dad, I can't eat this broccoli. It's disgusting. Those are not can't sentences, right? Can't means cannot, the inability to do something. Those are won't sentences. Won't means will not, the unwillingness to do something. For instance, I can't fly. Some of you said that was your thing. It doesn't matter or not if I have the willingness to. I don't have the ability to do that. I won't eat a tomato. I can physically eat a tomato. Grosses me out. Won't do it. I won't do it. I can't play the guitar. I won't listen to country music. Same thing. Now that I've made some enemies, we turn to chapter 9 of the book of John in our series called Abide. And in chapter 9, the difference between cannot and will not is going to be on full display today. And so the title for your notes is this: Can't see, won't see. Can't see, won't see. Now, as we go through the chapter today, we're going to be picking up our points as we go. And if you remember from our study so far, Jesus is in Jerusalem, and he's been teaching and ministering at the temple. And that is where we find him along with his disciples as our passage begins. So John chapter 9, verse 1 begins this way. Now, as Jesus passed by, he saw a man who was blind from birth, and his disciples asked him, saying, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? And recently in the book, we've seen a lot of theological discussions between Jesus and the Pharisees. So now the disciples are kind of like in that mode, right? So they bring up a theological question because they've been in that world. Like, okay, this guy's blind. Whose fault is it? Whose fault is the blindness? Now, what they are talking about is that blindness being a direct result of a specific sin. This was a commonly held belief at the time. And unfortunately, it's kind of a commonly held belief today. It's almost like a version of karma. Like when something bad happens, somebody must have done something wrong. Someone didn't have enough faith. Someone did a thing. So now this thing happens. Either this man's parents sinned, and that's why he's blind, or he sinned, and that's why he was born blind. He's been blind since birth. Jesus, did he do it? That means he would have had to sin before he was born. But listen, that was actually a teaching, or at least a debate among some of the rabbis. The idea of prenatal sin, right? Now, some of you moms like, I remember my pregnancy. My kid definitely sinned before birth. Now, the disciples by now know that Jesus has the answers, so they ask him, right? So they're kind of like, okay, theological mode. Here's this question. We've heard this. Jesus, whose fault is it? But before we get to his answer, let's consider something for a moment. Who's present in this conversation? Jesus, the disciples, who else? The man. And he's blind, but he's not deaf. He can hear what they are saying. They are having a casual conversation about a supposed sin that caused this man's blindness right in front of him. He's listening to the whole thing. So they're in the debate mode, right? And they want to discuss theology, and they want to be students. They want to learn. And listen, here at the house, we want to be students of God's word. Absolutely we do. But listen, they are guilty of what we can sometimes be guilty of. And it's the first point I'd encourage you to write down in our notes today. Number one, don't let theology make you miss humanity. Don't let theology make you miss humanity. Because their question feels pretty callous, right? They're reducing this man to a theological puzzle. And they're more interested in the discussion about being right than they are about the man himself. You know, I see Dawn over here. Matt and I had a lunch with her recently, and she does this, this amazing work in trying to reach people with the gospel. And what she told us, and I couldn't agree more, she says, hey, it has to start with compassion. It has to start for genuine concern for others. Because we can so easily fall into this trap. We talk about the problem of sin, or about brokenness, or trauma, or poverty, or sexual confusion, and we can kind of get this thrill in the debate of it, in figuring it out, and we can distance ourselves from the people that are hurting because they're facing the very things that we're philosophizing about. We look to the arguments instead of the people. And if we aren't careful, we can make knowledge an idol. As if Jesus came that we might be smarter than everybody else. And we can forget the simplicity of what the Apostle Paul wrote to young Timothy when he said, Christ Jesus came into the world to save sinners, by the way, of whom I am chief. Don't let theology make you miss humanity. They're not puzzles, they're people. Verse 3. Man, that should have been the point, right? They're not puzzles, they're people. Man, too little, too late. It's not even in my notes, just in the moment. Verse 3. Jesus answered, neither this man nor his parents sinned, but that the works of God should be revealed in him. I must work the works of him who sent me while it is day. The night is coming when no one can work. As long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world. So Jesus answers their question. Hey, it wasn't this man or the parents who sinned that directly caused this blindness. Now, can sin have consequences? Oh, absolutely. Even on how someone is born? Yes. Just ask someone whose birth mother used drugs while pregnant, and you'll find out that it is most certainly possible. But what Jesus is saying is that's not the case in this case. This is not the direct cause of direct sin, but it is a result of sin. See, God made the world perfect. He set Adam and Eve in this perfect world, but sin brought brokenness into the world. And as a result of that sin, we still inhabit a broken world. Our bodies deteriorate. Blindness happens. Deafness happens. Cancer happens because of the brokenness of the world by sin. But notice what Jesus says about this man's blindness. Yes, it's caused by a brokenness of the world. It wasn't caused by a specific sin, but he says that the works of God should be revealed in him. Jesus is indicating what he's about to do. And spoiler alert, he's about to miraculously heal this man. So, how do we hold that in tension with the brokenness of the world? Jesus is like, hey, let me show you the reason because I'm about to do something great, but also there's a brokenness here. Well, point number 2 is that tension. God doesn't cause brokenness, but he can redeem it. God doesn't cause brokenness, but he can redeem it. Jesus is going to take what is broken, painful, difficult. He's going to take what the enemy meant for evil, and he's going to use it for good. Right? Jesus isn't saying that he made this man blind. No, God only does good things. God doesn't cause brokenness, but he's about to use it. He's about to change this man's life physically, but more importantly, as we see in the chapter, he's going to use this brokenness. He's going to step into this brokenness, redeem it to change this man's life eternally, spiritually. And he still does the same thing today. Sometimes, like we're about to read, he does this by the healing of what is broken. Other times, he does this by letting what is broken remain. There are people in this church body that have seen that they've seen disease or disability, and I have seen God heal them for their good and God's glory. And there are others in this fellowship, and their affliction remains for their good and God's glory. Because God has used what they are walking through as his tool to bring a depth to their spiritual walk and bring a blessing to them and to others. But God didn't cause the brokenness, but he is redeeming it. And this also applies to what has happened to you in this life. Right? There's some of you in this room, and what you've walked through, you walked through some horrible, traumatic things. Some of you have memories that are almost too painful to access, memories of neglect, abuse. Hear me, God did not cause that brokenness. Hear me again. Then this is it's that question of pain. Why did God do this? No, God did not cause that brokenness. He looks at you and he says, oh, my child, this is not from me. My plans for you are blessing and for your good. My plans for you are peaceful and perfect. No, I didn't cause that pain, that trauma, that brokenness, but if you will let me, I want to redeem it. I want to give you back the years the locusts ate. I want to change generations of the future because of what I'm about to do in you. We live in a broken world, and we feel it. And that brokenness was not caused by God, but he is here to redeem it. And he even says here, hey, the time is now, while it's day, while the sun is shining, let's get to work. Verse 6. When he had said these things, he spat on the ground and made clay with the saliva. And he anointed the eyes of the blind man with the clay. And he said to him, go, wash in the pool of Siloam, which is translated sent. So he went and washed and came back seeing. Saliva mud. Ugh. Many of you know, well, he's sitting right over here, Brian Cheney over here. He was one of our key volunteers here. He kind of oversees our setup and tear down on the weekends here. And I'm going to out him as a germaphobe. He is. I first learned this a couple years ago when our families went together to a Mexican restaurant. And on our side of the table, we set down the chips and salsa, which is like the best part of any Mexican restaurant. It comes to the table, and on my side of the table with our family, it looks like a wood chipper. I mean, it's just, I look down at their family, at their side of the table, and Brian is placing a stack of chips in front of each one of his sons. And when they finish the stack of chips, they are allowed to ask for more. And I was like, dude, what are you doing? And he's like, I'm not reaching into that bowl after that. Are you kidding me? And I was like, they're your kids. He said, no. You want to reach into that bowl after their warm, moist hands have been in there? And I was like, okay. I see your point. So when I read this passage this week, I just pictured Brian Cheney watching it, being like, oh. It's a little gross, right? So why did Jesus choose this way to heal the man? After all, there's all sorts of ways he's healed people in the Gospels. He told the lame man, stand up, and he did. He told the father, remember the father, he said, go home, he's already better. Right? From miles away, there was a healing. He could have done anything. So why this? Well, I see two reasons here. And the first one is an important reminder for us. It's point number 3 for your notes. It's about the who, not the how. And this is key, y'all. This is key because we can get hung up on the how. No. It is about the who, not the how. I think one of the reasons Jesus used so many different methods of healing people is because it was never about the methods. It was always about Jesus. One of the names for God is Jehovah Rapha. It means the God who heals, the great physician. And just as you can use the brokenness of the world for our good, he can use whatever he wants to bring healing. I've seen people miraculously healed after prayer and the laying on of hands and the anointing with oil, like it says in the book of James. I've literally seen people that have gone to follow-up appointments at doctors come back the next week and said they couldn't even find anything. I've seen other people miraculously healed through God using the gift of modern medicine to bring healing. Guess what? Both of those things were God. That healing came from the great physician. And this passage reminds us it's not about the method, it's about the Messiah. It's not about the how, it's about the who. But listen. There's another important thing to note in these same verses. Jesus tells the man, he puts them on his eyes, he says, go wash in the pool of Siloam. What doesn't he tell the man? There's something conspicuously missing from that. He doesn't tell the man that he's going to be healed. Instead, he just gives him instructions. He gives him a command, a call to obey him. Walk a quarter of a mile, that's about how far it was, and you had to go down a bunch of stairs to the pool of Siloam and wash. Siloam meaning sent. And after the man does this, it says he received his sight. Point number 4. Sometimes his healing is waiting on our obedience. Sometimes his healing is waiting on our obedience. What if the man hadn't gone? What if he talked himself out of it? Or he ignored Jesus because the command wasn't an easy one? Or it didn't make sense, or he resented it? He's put mud in my eyes. I got to go walk. I'm blind. I got to find my way a quarter of a mile. What if he was just comfortable where he was? What if the man just washed off the clay at the first pool of water he came to? Because there were other pools of water before you get to Siloam. But he was sent to Siloam. He was sent to the place called Sent. And he obeyed and he received his sight. Maybe you're waiting on the Lord to do a healing work in your marriage. Are you walking in obedience to the commands he's given you for the marriage? Maybe you're walking through deep relational pain right now. Has God asked you to forgive, even if it hasn't been asked for? Maybe you're praying for financial freedom and for blessing. Are you honoring God with your first and your best, even if it doesn't make sense? Now, don't hear what I'm not saying. I'm not talking about earning a blessing. There is nothing we can do to deserve blessing or healing from God. But sometimes, as demonstrated in the story here, his healing is waiting on our obedience. It was after the man walked in obedience and washed in Siloam. Jesus wasn't even there at the pool. And he came back seeing. Verse 8. Therefore, the neighbors and those who previously had seen that he was blind said, "Is this not he who sat and begged?" Some said, "This is he." Others said, "He's like him." He said, "I am he." Therefore they said to him, "How were your eyes opened?" He answered and said, "A man called Jesus made clay and anointed my eyes and said to me, 'Go to the pool of Siloam and wash.' So I went and washed, and I received my sight." Then they said to him, "Where is he?" He said, "I don't know." The miracle takes place, and the people see this guy like looking around, and he must have been a sight, like born blind. He is seeing anything for the first time. And he's walking back towards the temple, seeing everything he's only heard or grasped up to this point. And the people think, is this that same guy? The guy's always sitting outside the temple? And some are like, well, it can't be him. Looks just like him, though. Look, when we have an encounter with Jesus, there are going to be people who look on and say, is this the same person? And the man tells them, yeah, it's me. And they say, well, what happened? He's like, what? He just tells them, like, this is what happened. So, of course, they want to know where Jesus is. Well, where'd this guy go? He's like, I was blind. I don't know which way he went. Right? In fact, I've never seen the guy. And, like, I'm new to faces, so I don't know if I'd recognize him anyway. Verse 13. They brought him, who formerly was blind, to the Pharisees. Now it was a Sabbath when Jesus made the clay and opened his eyes. Then the Pharisees also asked him again how he had received his sight. And he said to them, he put clay on my eyes and I washed and I see. Therefore some of the Pharisees said, this man is not from God because he does not keep the Sabbath. Others said, how can a man who's a sinner do such things? And there was a division among them. Always the case. They said to the blind man again, what do you say about him because he opened your eyes? He said, he's a prophet. I told you earlier there were at least two reasons that I see that Jesus made the clay with his saliva in this case. And here's my second reason. What have the Pharisees been so mad at Jesus about lately? Doing something on the Sabbath, right? That's come up again and again and again. And what's pointed out here? That this was on the Sabbath. Now, quick refresher if you haven't been with us. What the Old Testament says about the Sabbath is to keep it holy and to not work. There are a few lines of specificity, but the command is to rest and give God glory, plain and simple. But over the years, the Pharisees had been adding their own detail to this in writings called the Talmud and the Mishnah. And where the Old Testament had a few lines of detail, there are now chapters and chapters of additional extra-biblical writing of man-made regulations that the Pharisees had brought. For instance, this is a real example. You were, good news, allowed to spit on the Sabbath. There you go. Unless when you spat, it made a furrow in the ground, then that was considered agricultural work because you just plowed the ground with your spit. True example. So what did Jesus do? He spat in the dirt and he made clay. It was an act of work according to their rules. He applied it to the man's eyes, another act of work. That's why it says, notice in the passage it says, now it was Sabbath when Jesus made the clay. Like John points out, let me tell you what the real problem was here. He made the clay. Now again, Jesus never broke the Old Testament law. Don't see that. It wasn't like Jesus came in to blow everything up. No. He obeyed everyone. He perfectly fulfilled the law. But it did violate the man-made additions to the law from the Pharisees. And that's why I say I think this is the second reason he did it. I think he did it to aggravate the Pharisees. I think he did it to prove a point of what's happening here. And it's enough for the Pharisees to say, there is no way this man could possibly be from God because he doesn't meet our man-made requirements. But others point out, okay, how did he do it then? So they ask the man, well, who do you say he is? I mean, he healed you after all. He says, well, he's a prophet, meaning this man's got to be from God, right? He's a prophet. He's a representative of God. Verse 18. But the Jews did not believe concerning him. And remember, when John says the Jews, he's talking about the Pharisees, the religious leaders, that he had been blind and received his sight until they called the parents of him who had received his sight. And they asked them, saying, "Is this your son who you say was born blind? How then does he now see?" His parents answered them and said, "Well, we know that this is our son and that he was born blind. But by what means he now sees, we do not know, or who opened his eyes, we do not know. He is of age. Ask him. He'll speak for himself." His parents said these things because they feared the Jews, for the Jews had agreed already that if anyone confessed that he was the Christ, he would be put out of the synagogue. Therefore, his parents said, "He is of age. Ask him." Now we're seeing a little bit more of our title here. Can't see, won't see. The Pharisees have this man standing in front of them, healed, and they refuse to see what's in front of them. So they decide it would be easier to believe that this man has been faking blindness for his entire life. So they haul in his parents and they say, "Well, how did this happen? Is this your son? Is he born blind? What happened?" And his parents get a little cagey. "Yes, he is our son. Yes, he was born blind. Other than that, no comment." Right? He's grown. Ask him. That means, by the way, he said that he's of age, right? 13, bar mitzvah, so he's at least 13. 20, you can serve in military, perhaps he's 20. 30 was considered full maturity age, so this guy's probably 30. But we're told here why they're doing this. It's out of fear. The Pharisees have made it clear that you were going to be put out of the temple, excommunicated for confessing that Jesus is the Christ. It wasn't just like, okay, go find another temple. No, this was a curse. This was a social stigma, being outcasts publicly in front of everyone. So they're staying away from that, right? They turn into like congressional hearings real quick. Yes, he is our son. Yes, he was born blind. I have no recollection of anything else. So they're getting nowhere with the parents, so they haul the guy back in again, the artist formerly known as the blind man. Verse 24. So they again called the man who was blind and said to him, "Give God the glory. We know that this man is a sinner." He answered and said, "Whether he's a sinner or not, I do not know. One thing I know, that though I was blind, now I see." There it is. They're trying to debate this guy, and he just says, "Look, all I can tell you is that my life was changed forever." Let's not miss this. Point number 5. Simple is powerful. Simple is powerful. We say all the time at the house that our goal is to be followers of Jesus and students of his word. Those are action words. We follow, we move. We're different tomorrow than we were today. We study, we're students, we learn, we understand more tomorrow than when we do today. Growth is important, but listen, if you're at a place today in your walk with Jesus where all you can say is, "Hey, all I know is I was blind, but now I see," that's powerful. And listen, nobody can debate that testimony away from you. He's like, we don't need to get into a debate. You don't have to prove anything to me because I was blind and now I see. Simple is powerful. Don't lose the simple. Don't worry, I'm not far enough, or man, can I really? No. If you were blind and now you see, that's powerful. Verse 26. Then they said to him again, "What did he do to you? How did he open your eyes?" He answered them, "I told you already, and you did not listen. Why do you want to hear it again? Do you also want to become his disciples?" I like this guy. You know, first time, as I was studying and I was like, is this guy just kind of genuine? No, I think he's got a little spice to him. I think he's a little feisty. Because he says, "Guys, you can ask me all day long. The facts are the facts. I've told you this multiple times now. Are you wanting to follow him? Is that why you're so interested? It's almost like, if you like him so much, why don't you marry him, right? But notice, but here's the thing, we can get lost in the sarcasm, but there's something else that we see in this man in this. He says, do you also want to become his disciples? He's revealing there's now a growing desire in himself to follow this man, Jesus. Well, not everybody appreciates this guy's witty remarks. Verse 28. Then they reviled him and said, you're his disciple, but we're Moses' disciples. We know that God spoke to Moses. As for this fellow, we do not know where he's from. The man answered and said to them, why, this is a marvelous thing, that you do not know where he is from, yet he's opened my eyes. Now we know that God does not hear sinners, but if anyone is a worshiper of God and does his will, he hears him. Since the world began, it's been unheard of that anyone's opened the eyes of one who was born blind. If this man were not from God, he could do nothing. And they answered and said to him, you were completely born in sin, and you're teaching us? And they cast him out. The formerly blind man can't believe his ears. He couldn't see, but they were unwilling to see. He says, are you kidding me, guys? The learned men, the experts, this guy is doing the work of God, and you say you're on God's team. You're supposed to be all for this, yet you say you know nothing about him? I thought I was blind. You guys take the cake. God isn't going to grant the ability to heal a man born blind, unheard of, to someone who's against God. He has to be from God. It's like a little lesson in logic. And they meet his comment with insults. They say, no, your blindness was a result of sin. They're going back to that initial question. This was a curse on you from God. You must have deserved this. And they throw him out of the temple. He's done, excommunicated. Verse 35. Jesus heard that they had cast him out. And when he had found him, he said to him, do you believe in the Son of God? He answered, said, who is he, Lord, that I may believe in him? And Jesus said to him, you have both seen him, and it is he who is talking with you. Then he said, Lord, I believe. And he worshiped him. Something struck me reading this. It's right there in that verse 35. There's a term that's been used more and more in recent years, in our church culture anyway, and the term is church hurt. And in the South, where it seems everybody's been part of a church at some point or another, it's a fairly common thing. And for years, I worked in ministry, and I would encounter people, and they would say, oh yeah, I'm just dealing with church, or I'm dealing with, and I'd never experienced it. And so I had no category for it mentally or emotionally, and just try to minister. Suffice it to say, I understand it now. My wife understands it now. Our children understand it now. So there is a fresh empathy for those who have walked through great pain at the hands of, at least in name, the church. And this man certainly did. This man understands church hurt. What did he do? He got healed. That's his crime. Did you notice that? This man, in his blindness, had been allowed to beg at the temple doors his entire life. He was welcome then. The minute he is healed, that crime is offensive and he's cast out. He had more social acceptance in the church when he was a blind beggar than he does when Jesus opened his eyes. That's hurtful. This guy's got a wound now. Yet, what did we read in verse 35? It says, when Jesus found him. The last thing we read was they cast him out, and Jesus found him. Point number 6. When man excludes, God pursues. Now, I use that example of church hurt because that's kind of like textbook what we just saw. But whether you've been hurt by religious leaders or religious people or just by the world in general, because we live in a broken world, if you feel lonely and hurt or excluded or cast out, Jesus is pursuing you. Maybe you're here at church and you're like, I don't know. I don't know why I'm here. I'm just checking this out. Someone invited me. I always get hurt. And listen, I'm not going to promise you won't. Because we are human and we make mistakes. I hope you won't. But when the men cast this guy out, Jesus said, I got to find him. I'm going after him. And when he did, he invited him into the family. He said, do you know the Son of Man? Do you know the Son of God? He invites him into the family of God by trusting in Jesus. And this same Jesus is pursuing you. And he asks you the same question, do you believe? He says, hey, I know they hurt you, but let me tell you what it's all about. I know that, you were raised a way that maybe brought some pain to you, but I'm pursuing you. I know that your experience with religious people hurt you, but I'm pursuing you. I know that the world has made you feel upside down, but I'm pursuing you, and I've got one question for you. Do you believe in the Son of God? You say, no, I'm good. I don't need Jesus. I can figure this out on my own. Verse 39. And Jesus said, for judgment I've come into this world, that those who do not see may see, and that those who see may be made blind. Then some of the Pharisees who were with him heard these words and said to him, are we blind also? Jesus said to them, if you were blind, you would have no sin. But now you say, we see. Therefore, your sin remains. Point number 7, we'll end with this point. Claiming sight apart from Jesus is blindness. Claiming sight apart from Jesus is blindness. Jesus kind of dives into this and he shares what is referred to as the upside down kingdom. Right? We've got these hats at the house. And then the house it's literally printed upside down. It's a reminder this is an upside down kingdom that Jesus came to bring. And he says, hey, those who see, they're going to be blind. And those who can't see, I'm here to make sure they see. And the Pharisees say, well, obviously we can see. We're the Pharisees. We're the who's who. And Jesus says, if you think you see, you just proved your blindness. And we can do the same thing. No, I see. I read a lot of books, listen to a lot of podcasts. I've got it figured out. I don't need Jesus. I'm too smart for that. I don't need to be saved. That's blindness. And it's blindness because you won't see. But the person who's humble enough, the person who's real enough to say, I can't see, Jesus says, that I can work with. I came to give you sight. And so I want to close our time before we get to worshiping in just a moment. We got plenty of time for this. I want to close our time with an invitation for 3 groups of people in the room. The first, I want to give an invitation for the believers in the room. For the believers, I want to invite you as we kind of move into this final song to just step into gratitude, to go back to the simple, the power of the simple. I was blind, but now I see. And if you belong to Jesus, I'm sure there's a lot you don't understand. There's a lot I don't understand. But no one can debate me out of, I was blind, but now I see. I was dead man walking, and now I live. I was headed nowhere. In fact, I was headed to an eternity apart from God. Now, what's the worst that can happen? Someone kill me? Hallelujah, I'm with Jesus. That's a different life. And so for the believers in the room, I just want to say, hey, invitation as we step into this last song, just to bring a heart of gratitude, just to sing from maybe a deeper place today. The second invitation is for those who would say, you know, I'm not really sure. I'm not really sure where I am on the journey. The invitation I would give you is to consider the man in the passage. Because we see a journey in this one chapter. Because in verse 11, they say, who was this? He said, it's a man called Jesus. That's who did it. Clearly a good guy. He did something good for me. He was a good man. Later on, verse 17, they say, who is he? He said, he's a prophet. Clearly this guy came from God. He's somebody special. There's a change in how he views Jesus. And then by verse 36, he says, Lord, I believe. I believe you are the Son of God. He says he worshiped him. There was a progression. There was there's something different about this Jesus. He did something special. He's a good man. Gosh, I think he's from God. Lord, I believe you're the Son of God and you're deserving of my worship. And guess what? For believers in Jesus, we will literally worship shoulder to shoulder with this man in eternity. So if you're not sure, I would your invitation is to consider, where are you on that journey? Yeah, Jesus is a good man. He's got some good teachings. Has it progressed? Yeah, I mean, he clearly was somebody special. Maybe he was a prophet indeed. But listen, you can't say Jesus was a good man, because if he isn't who he claimed he was, then he's a liar. That's not a good man. And you can't claim Jesus was a prophet if he didn't do everything he claimed would happen, because a prophet is disproved if their prophecies are wrong, and he said, I'm coming back after 3 days. If he was a prophet, then he couldn't be a prophet if he didn't come back after 3 days, which means he's either a bad man or he's a liar or he truly is the Son of God. So wherever you are on that journey, I want to challenge you to look to Jesus today and say, is this the day that I say, Lord, I believe and worship him? Finally, worship team, you can come on up. As we step into this last song, I want to just kind of open the altar today. And first of all, I want to open the altar for anyone who says, hey, Lord, I believe, help me believe. Like, Lord, I want to know more. I'm on this journey. Come up, pray. But I also want to open the altar for anyone today who's in need of healing. Because let's not forget that what we saw here was a healing in this passage. And our God still heals. And as I said, sometimes that's through medicine, sometimes that's just through in the moment miraculous. I've seen it. And so if you're in need of healing today, and that could be a physical ailment, that could be a sickness, that could be a season you're in of depression. That could be a deep anxiety that's eating you from the inside out. That could be that you haven't slept lately because dreams are gnawing at you. That could be there's just something in you that says, I know this isn't what God intended for me. I know that what I'm walking through is a result of the brokenness of the world. The invitation is this. We're going to have a couple people up front. Just come forward for prayer. I can't heal you. but he can. And it could be in this very moment, God may choose to bring miraculous total healing. It could be that he's just going to bring peace in the midst. It could be that he's going to enlighten you and it's like, hey, here's what I've been doing the whole time. I don't know. Let's find out. And you say, I don't like getting up in front of people. I would say if a blind man with mud on his face can walk a quarter of a mile when he wasn't even promised healing, that some of us can walk forward and say, I'm going to turn to Jesus in the midst of this. Physical pain, emotional pain, relational pain. You can come and just kneel before him. You can come to the couple of us that'll be up here and we'll pray with you. We'll anoint you with oil, as it says in the book of James. It'd be our honor to do so. We're going to turn to Jesus, Jehovah Rapha, the great physician, the God who heals. But oh, that there would be a spirit of gratitude in this place as we look to the one whom still makes the blind man and the blind heart see. Hey everybody, Pastor Brian here. Thanks so much for checking out this teaching from the house. Look, if something stood out to you, ministered to you, or maybe you could use some prayer or have some more questions about Jesus, drop us a line. info@thehousechat.com. That's chat with 2 T's. Now, if you want to support the ministry God is doing here at the house, or just get a whole bunch more information on who we are as a church, you can head to thehousechat.com. Have a great week.